All right, welcome everybody to the July 27th, 2017 edition of Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog. Today we're going to have some ongoing, we're going to continue the ongoing design discussions around what do we need to do for beta and what's the right way to do the things. So I don't know, Aaron, were you going to be the objective facilitator today?
Yep.
All right, do we have somebody who would like to take notes?
Come on, come on.
I guess I can do it if no one else wants to.
Okay,
Please.
that would be great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. Jeff, can you share your screen so that we can see what notes you're taking?
1 second. Does that look right?
That looks like the right doc.
Can you zoom in,
Do you mind
please?
making that a little bit bigger, Jeff? The text? Perfect.
All right, 1 second. Oh my God, my normal Gmail account owns this. All right, 1 second. Weird. It's taking a while for this to like load. Okay, Jeff. I think if you reload that document, you should have edit access now.
Sweet.
Not this day, sorry. It's July 27th. Can you scroll down a bit?
Yeah, scroll down a little bit.
July 27th.
All right, I think we're ready to get started now. Anybody? We all good, Jeff?
Okie dokie.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, it looks like we're good now. All right. Nal, you
So,
put this.
Paul, let me say a few things before we start.
Sure thing.
Paul,
Muscle memory.
that's okay. No worries. So you guys, probably everyone already noticed that there are items for July 31st, August 1st, all the way through to August 7th. Those result from the action items from yesterday to follow up on certain things. You'll notice, though, that they go all the way out to August 7th because Doug is going to be out next week, and the items that are far out there are things that he either needs to be here to introduce or reintroduce, or he needs to be here as part of the discussion. So we're going to be covering at least those things in the future design meetings. But of course, the next design meeting will be on Monday, July 31st. And if you have something to talk about in that meeting, just add it to the list as normal. So Jeff, thank you for taking notes today. We're going to continue doing the speaker queue. So for anyone who wasn't here or forgot, if you have something you'd like to contribute, please just type +hand, just like this, into the chat, and I'll add you to the back of the speaker queue, and then we'll have people talking in FIFO order. Other than that, I think we're good to go. So Neil, I think this is something you added to the top of the speaker queue about parameter major redesign.
Yeah, Doug has added, but it is the result of our long discussion with him yesterday. He was going to join the call, I think, from the airport, but looks like he didn't make it.
I just spoke to him, and he said that he wasn't going to be able to make it today.
Okay. Jeff, can you open the link, please? So there were a couple of concerns from Doug regarding the current design. He wanted to address, at least in the design, maybe not in the implementation. And so I have listed them here. So one is the list support by having a way to support specify more than one source of information. Another is merging strategy for merging different sources altogether to build the final JSON. And another is ease of use for most common simple use cases. And during this discussion, we have had, I think, 3 different proposals, slightly changing the current proposal, but it still wasn't good enough. And in the end, we came back to I think this was one of the initial ideas in the instance parameter support, at least in the issue, taking the approach from environment from and trying to apply it to instance parameters. And it had a bunch of limitations, like, for example, no way to distinguish string from JSON. There was some other stuff. Again, it was mostly about like environment variables is just map from string to string, and we need something more. We need to be able to express string to JSON, basically. And this time, we have tried to solve this problem. So here it's listed as using config map k blob ref, like special type of implementation for embedding JSON as compared to all the others using string. But I have actually added a command to this page, another one, to add a basic type field here. So we have name field, type, which is optional by default string, but you can specify JSON and maybe in the future something else, and then the value. And this way we can express basically any structure we want. And the merging strategy will be exactly the same as with environment variables. And for the conflict resolution, for example, environment from implementation says that values are more important than the values from sources, like direct values. And in case of any conflict, the last value wins. There is no error or exception or anything. And if we just follow these rules, I think it should be pretty easy for the users to understand how to use it. And this is the example of specification, which allows us to basically express any kind of information, both sensitive and non-sensitive, taken from inline and taken from whether config map or secret key. And there are two different sections, parameters and parameters from. First is to express separate fields, and parameters from is to inject, for example, all the keys from a single secret. And I think, like this structure reflects exactly how environment variables work. So I have an example below for pod using environment from with a very similar approach. So what do you think?
Cool.
I have already started this implementation. Sorry, I have started already this implementation. It looks like it's not too hard to implement, and I probably will finish it by the end of the day if we agree on this. But yeah, it was a little bit premature, I guess.
Okay. No, that's good. Thank you for that explanation. That was very helpful. So I think, Paul, you have your hand up, so you go ahead.
The first thing I wanted to say is that Jeff, the Zoom window that has people's video on it is flickering very rapidly and consistently. Yeah, there we go. Second, I think that I had misread actually that proposal. So I realized that after I typed in that I had my hand raised. I will think, yeah, let me think. Someone else can talk. Sorry about that.
So since there are no hands up, I'll throw in a note here. I have notes written yesterday, I believe by, Doug was the note taker, I think, yesterday. Someone seems to have said that we should discuss merging strategies another time, and I set up a call. One of my action items was to set up a call to discuss merging strategies later, and that is scheduled for August 3rd, which is the first day that Doug is back. So there's just a note that happens, that will happen on August 3rd. Go ahead, Neil.
So yes, this is true, but Doug's concern was once we merge current proposal, it becomes incompatible with other design proposals, and he wanted to finalize the design first before making any changes merged. And this was the initial idea, and yeah, it turned into completely redesigning the whole proposal.
Okay. Paul, I didn't see another hand from you. Sorry. I guess maybe Zoom missed it, but go ahead. I assume you had one up.
Well, for the record, I accept your apology, Aaron. You'll have to send me your address so I can send your receipt to you.
Okay.
All right. So, having had a chance to think about it, I have some questions about like the details. So, I think it might be okay. So I have a few. I guess I have a few corner cases. So, say that we have in the parameter section, we define a value for parameter foo, and then one of the parameter from things. Say we have a parameter from give me everything in a secret, and that also has foo. Do the same semantics of the latest thing appearing in the from section override what is explicitly stated? What are the semantics there for precedence?
Is that the merge thing, or?
So yes, it's a merging thing, and environment variables has already a strategy for this. And as far as I remember, they say that any value taken from sources is being overridden by directly inline injected value if there is a conflict. And if there are multiple sources conflicting with each other, or multiple inline maybe as well conflicting with each other, the last item in the list wins. So
Okay.
the rules are really simple, I guess, and easy to follow. I think we should adopt them just to make it less ambiguous compared to environment variables.
Okay, so I have another corner case then. I noticed if Jeff, if you would switch back to the issue text. So I noticed the config map key blob ref.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on what the semantics of that are a little bit?
So before we discuss that, we need a way to inject value from secret key or like whichever else way to inject the value as a JSON object, not as a string. And it's exactly the same semantics. Actually, Jeff, can you scroll a bit down to the next comment a little bit more? Yeah, I have actually an alternative proposal to this. Is like an extension of the other one. I don't think we need special secret key blob ref and config map key blob ref. I would just propose to add a type, like at the same level as we have name for a property. We can define type, and when you say type JSON, it means that once you take a value from secret key, treat this value as JSON object, or by default we will treat it as a string.
So I think there are probably some facets of what the right exact API construction is, but before we talk about those, I am wondering what's the algorithm for dealing with a value that's supposed to be raw JSON. I would imagine that it would be to take the data that's in whatever the source is and to have to treat that as JSON, deserialize it into a map of string to object, although Sam, I see that you've raised a question about that. Well, somehow deserialize it and then merge it into what I believe at this point we're implying is a JSON dictionary that we're building, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the final structure is a JSON map, basically. And the problem with if we don't explicitly say what the type of value is, the problem is that, for example, if the string looks like JSON, if we treat it as a JSON, it is basically a duck typing. And if someone wants to pass it as a string, not as a JSON, we can't do this. And for example, if someone passes a value of string with the text true, we can think of it as a boolean and pass it as a like raw value, right? But
yeah.
Then the user won't be able to pass true as a string, which some broker could only accept. So I would prefer to be explicit.
I think
like all the cases.
So Samuel, does that answer your question that you asked in chat?
I think so. I'm just trying to understand the simple case where I have one value that's not a JSON object, but it's not a string. It's like a Boolean. How would that be represented here?
And to be clear, you're talking about the raw value of a secret key that you want to put a Boolean in?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Do I still have my hand up or do I have to raise it again?
You go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so yeah, I think that basically it has to be explicit somehow in the spec. By the spec, I mean it has to be explicit in the API whether you should treat the value as a string or as JSON. And I think we do agree on that facet. I'm not sure if we necessarily agree on what the right API construction is, but if we agree that it should be explicit, we can perhaps start talking about what the right API construction is.
Okay.
So
What about
we have a +1 to explicit types from Sam. Neil, anybody else? I wonder what you all think about the explicit, having this type be called out explicitly. Can we have any objections to that be surfaced here at this point? Yes, and Vile, that includes you. Any objections?
No, I mean, I think what I kind of want to do is for people to go ahead and look at some of the some of the examples on what it would look like, and just kind of play around with it and see what it would look like, and see if it makes simple things simple and complicated semi-possible.
Okay. So first, Jeff, can you write down the part about explicit types, and then also write down Vile's request to have this be prototyped in some way?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that the issue is great. For the record, I am the creator of the environment variable API constructions in the core for this. And it's very complicated. I think that following those kind of semantics and having consistency there is really good. But it's complicated enough that I think it would be great to have somebody write up a proposal document that outlines all of these behaviors that we can further get agreement on, because they are very, very complex, before we start writing code. And I'm sorry, Nal, that you've already started writing code on it, but experience shows me from basically doing the same problem in the core that the semantics are much more difficult to pin down than you might think. And they're very much past my threshold for something that I think that we should write down in like a design document.
Okay. Neil, you had your hand up next, so go ahead.
Yeah, well, I can start writing this document as a separate PR, I guess. If we wanted this finally get merged as a separate document in our repo, then yeah, I think this could work. So about the examples, yeah, I was going to say that like I have a PR in progress, which we can take a look at, just like how the mechanics work here. But yeah, I think proposal works as well. I mean, design proposal. So my question was, is there any principal objection to this direction?
Anybody? Going once? Okay. Morgan, you have your hand up, but I'm not sure if do you want to ask what you asked?
I like the example that the core looks like this versus this proposal. I'm not familiar with. Great example, love it. Not familiar with what the core does to be able to look at that and understand what's going on. So
yeah, I'm trying to think of what the most. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Morgan, what was that last part?
If somebody could put a link into whatever that is we're trying to be consistent with, I would appreciate that to look at and evaluate that with that specific respect, but not other than that, that looks same.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of if there's a single place to point you. I can definitely point you to where the types are specified in the core, but the design work, since we kind of organically did this over many different features, was spread out over numerous different proposals. So
okay.
I'll do what I can to find those for you, and I'll definitely link you to where the types are specified in the core.
Okay. So what I'm hearing here is that, and someone correct me if I'm wrong after I finish this, I'm hearing that we need a comprehensive design document complete with links to at least one environment variable merging example and or document. And then we need to come back and review that design document in a future design session.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure that-
but I think
Let's do our hand thing. Let's
Okay.
go back to that. Anybody want to put their hand up? I know you, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I'm not. I think if we have consensus on this general direction, we don't necessarily have to give it another treatment in a design meeting. I guess we can if there are some things that we find especially difficult to talk through on GitHub. But I'm fairly confident that Nala can put together a bulletproof proposal that will shred any doubts that folks have.
So when you say proposal, are we talking about a new PR?
We're talking about a
PR?
pull request with a markdown document that has the use cases, motivation, analysis, and lots of examples, and then some generalities about the implementation.
Okay. Now, Neil, you cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jeff, can you put an action item down for Neil to put up such a PR? And anybody else, does anyone have any other comments, questions, objections about this particular topic? Neil, before we move on, Paul would like you to teach us how to pronounce your name.
Yeah, we'll get a recording this time.
Okay. Well, I can pronounce it correctly in Russian.
Go ahead.
It's Nail, and it's.
Nail.
I think it's almost impossible for anyone who is not Italian or French to pronounce it correctly.
I'm not half Italian. Does that count?
Oh yeah.
Nail.
So I have alternative pronunciation as Nile, as like it's my nickname on the internet just to make it easier to pronounce. So yeah, any of these two, and Neil, it works as well for me.
I'll start saying Nile.
Okay.
Sorry, after all this time, I've been calling you Neil.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right. It sounds like we're good with this topic. I think we can move on. It looks like the next topic is highly related, if not completely overlapped with the previous. Niall, can you confirm or deny that?
Yeah, this was one of the minor changes to the initial proposal we have come with Doug, and I added a comment that we should skip it if we agree on the first item. So just keep it.
Okay.
So we have like three different options of how to slightly improve the proposal, but now it's completely changed. So no need for this.
Okay. And it sounds like you're going to cover this in your new PR anyway. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Same thing with the third. Sounds like that will be covered too.
With the third, I think it's still, we can slightly discuss it, that my current implementation of parameters support in instance has a field called parameters, and I have no idea how to correctly handle this situation if we want to support backward compatibility. So like if the new field is called alpha parameters, then at some point we ditch the old one, and then we have to rename back alpha parameters to parameters. So I don't understand the mechanics. This is one question. And another is whether we have to follow this kind of like iterative approach at all before we come to beta.
Okay. Okay, so since the second one sounds like it's going to be completed and addressed in your PR, let's go to the third. And Paul, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
So if we have consensus around this stuff, and since our consensus is towards a direction that we can add new things in a backward compatible way, to me, that's good enough to break incompatibility with the existing API, which is itself alpha. And I only ask that we give people advance notice, which I said I would do as a takeaway yesterday once we had some consensus. So it might be time to say, heads up, we know that this API surface is going to change. I'll respond back when it's going to change in advance, but know that we've already decided that we're going to go a different direction and that it will change for you.
Okay. So first thing, can you put your hand up in the chat if you disagree with the consensus that we are going to remove the parameters field and replace it with alpha parameters? Going once.
I'm sorry, that wasn't what I thought we were talking about. I thought we were talking about wholesale, just changing the semantics of the parameters field.
Oh, but you're not suggesting remove it? I must have.
So the existing field is called parameters, and I think we have a design consensus that Nail is going to go right up. And once, I mean, at this point, I think we know the API is going to change. In retrospect, we probably should have named the parameters field alpha parameters, but it's all good. And so I will send a message to the list now that says, hey, this is going to change in the future. And I will reply back with additional advance notice once it's imminently going to go in.
Okay.
And we'll give people maybe a week. I think by the time the proposal is finished, we'll have enough clarity on when it's going to go in that we can give people a week's advance and say it's going to change on this date. Be prepared. So once we get to that point, we'll send additional advance notice out. Does that make sense?
To me, yes. But Vile, you got your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I had 2 points. One of them is it seems like there's a few of these fields and or resource names that we are planning on changing. So I wonder if it would make sense to go ahead and spend a little time looking and seeing are there any additional fields that we think might be changing at this point, and then maybe sending a note to list saying, okay, if it turns out that it's only the resource names and the parameters, then send a note saying, hey, here are changes that are coming, heads up. But I think it'd be useful to go ahead and look at a few different fields as well and see, do we think they are, and then maybe change them to alphas or whatever now rather than later. And as far as I forget who it said, do we want to keep on making iterative changes? I think it'd be better to go, it might be simpler to go ahead and break things and then go ahead and come up with the right solution rather than take on poorly supporting backward compatible things forever.
Okay, Niall, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, my question was whether Willy proposes to make an announcement as a single document or to make all the PRs merged at the same time, because I'm a little bit concerned about getting everything merged at the same time, because it means
Only
that
the announcement.
if there is one feature which is still not implemented, we will have to wait until it is done.
Yeah, I was thinking about sending a notice out simply because if somebody misses a particular announcement or whatever else, they won't see it. Whereas if there's a big one with the using HTML blink tag, everybody's pleasure, making sure that everybody sees this announcement, and there's an easy way to track that. I wasn't proposing on doing a single PR merge. I agree it's not going to happen.
So it sounds like we've got another action item for Vile. I'm going to volunteer you for submitting an announcement on the Google group, perhaps, saying that things are in flux. I don't know exactly what you wanted to say, Vile, but I'll trust that you have something in mind already.
Sure, I will draft something up today and run it by you folks.
And Jeff, can you specify in Paul's action item that this is a warning to the mailing list specifically about instance parameters? Thank you. And VLAs is more generally about some fields maybe changing during alpha as a reminder. Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns about just generally instance parameters, or more to Vilay's point about fields in general during our alpha releases?
Yeah, I have my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
So I
Did I hold on one sec? Niall, did I get you already? I apologize. I think I did. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so I definitely second Vilay what I think your assertion was that we should try to make as few breaking changes as possible. I think that means that we should be very smart about how we plan changes that will break and plan the release that they're going to be in. So, like for example, I think we all expect resource names to change. We're definitely going to change this field. I think that it would be best to try to batch them into the same release so that we have as few releases as possible that we have breaking changes in. I'm not sure if I think that renaming fields to indicate that they're specifically alpha is going to do more good than harm, but we can definitely discuss that as a separate thing.
Okay, now go ahead.
Yeah, my question was about the binding parameters. So I think we have mentioned before that, and Doug has asked me even in the PR why didn't I do this already? So if we change the instance parameters to make it more flexible, it could be beneficial to make binding credentials output flexible as well. It's not going to be the same type, obviously, because like we have different semantics. But if we want to make this change, we can do that. I would prefer to keep this change separately, but if we say that like we want to have similar features to be released at the same time, we can start discussing this as well. But I think that we have already hijacked like several discussions on these instance parameters, and I would prefer to keep it a bit for offline discussion in the issues and PRs.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, so I think there are two different facets here that we should be really explicit about teasing out. So bindings also have parameters, and I think that when we've been having this discussion, we're really agreeing on what is the general purpose API construction for specifying parameters to things, and that for input parameters to bindings, that we should just use the same API constructions. Does anybody disagree with that?
Going once. Okay, sounds like we don't have disagreement on that.
Okay. Secondly, I think that binding output is orthogonal from this, and I agree with Nail that we've hijacked many discussions about this. I think that we should agree to just treat binding output as a different topic.
So Niall has a question in chat. Now I'm going to consider that a hand since no one else has their hand. Can you verbalize it?
Yeah, my question is whether Paul thinks that changing in the binding parameters API should be done in sync with instance parameters, and should it be the same PR, or should we first try to run it for instance parameters and then adopt it to bindings?
So my response to that would be the time to run it and see how we feel about it is in the write-up of the proposal. And I definitely think that we should change them at the same time.
Okay.
So this sounds like a pretty good decision point. I will verbalize the decision here and ask if anyone has objections. So the decision I've heard is we're going to, Niall, you're going to write up a proposal and design document in a PR for how generally we deal with input parameters to instance and binding. Once we have consensus there and everyone agrees on that design, we will then implement it for both instances and bindings. Does anybody disagree with that strategy? Put your hand up in the chat if you do.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. So step one, Niall will write a proposal and design doc on how input parameters work for binding an instance. Step two, we get everyone bought into that. So we make changes as necessary so that everyone agrees. And step three, we submit one PR to implement that design for binding parameters and for instance parameters. So can you put your hand up in the chat if you disagree with that three-step process? Going once. Okay. So Jeff, can you write down those 3 steps? Cool. All right. So this is the last item on the list. So I want to first ask, does anyone have any last minute comments, questions about instance parameters and changing the semantics of that field? Going once. Okay. Does anybody have any items they want to cover today? Going once. Okay. Now go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I have a alternative authentication PR open, and I want it to be reviewed and have some feedback if there is any. So it's part of the design, I guess, but I think we have agreed on the initial design. Now it's time to look at the implementation of it.
And now what PR or what number is the PR?
Okay, I'll find it.
Is it the bearer token one?
Yes, it is 1053.
53.
Yeah, that one's been on my list. Things have been falling over sideways on me left and right. I owe you a review.
I'll do the same now. Okay, I do not see any other hands. So Jeff, I'll work with you to finish that list. I'll just work with you offline over Skype, which is ironically online. That was a pun, so you guys can all groan at your own leisure. And for that, I think that we can all get 13 minutes back from our days. So thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you on Monday.
See you.
See you, everybody. Bye.